On today's World Have Your Say, we're going to talk about Syria and the tough choices facing one of its neighbours. Now, Turkey says it doesn't want war, but 5 of its citizens were killed by a Syrian mortar attack this week, and now it must decide what to do. We'll discuss that live here on the BBC. We're also going to try and understand the impact the conflict is having on day-to-day life in Syria with the help of some of you who've been there recently. Now, if you are Syrian or Turkish and would like to take part, all of our contact details are on the screen throughout the programme. Well, part of what we're trying to do today is to understand how the conflict in Syria is affecting the day-to-day lives of people living there. And with the help of a particularly impressive piece of kit which uses a number of 3G SIM cards, we can speak now to Can Artuna, who is a correspondent for Turkish television's NTV. Can, thank you for joining us live. You're inside Syria. Tell us where you are and what's happening around the place you're in.
We have been here since this morning. This is Tel Abyad village, just opposite of Turkish border. I mean, literally hundreds of meters away from Turkish border town, Akcakale indeed. This has been a deserted town for the last 10 days. There are only a small number of civilians left in this town, and most of the people wandering around us are armed people. They are the groups fighting for Free Syrian Army. They are individual brigades, and this area now we are broadcasting are kept by Turkmen Brigade, 120 armed men I'm talking about. Since our arrival with our cameraman, Cüneyt Ali Horozal, we have seen damaged buildings, and nearly 10,000 people from this Tel Abyad village have deserted their homes and crossed the border and now seeking shelter in Turkey. In the opposite side of the border in Akcakale district, as you know, a mortar shell hit 2 days ago and 5 people were killed. 3 children, 2 women were killed, and now after the Turkish artillery responded quickly to Syrian positions, Syrian artillery has stopped firing here. So people in both in Akcakale and here in Tel Abyad village tell us that it's been one of the most peaceful times because there are no mortar rounds and there are no artillery fired on them. But the thing is that there's serious shortage of food and basic needs.
Can you tell us about where people are getting food from? Are there shops where you are, and are those shops able to get the food produce they want to sell?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
I just wondered whether the people where you are able to get food. Where's the food coming from?
Okay, this is the case. For example, one of the basic needs, bread. There's no bread here. There are no open bakeries left. So a lot of people get their basic needs and foods from Turkey. But of course, this is not enough to feed all the people in this border area. So there's a shortage of basic needs, bread, salt, sugar, etc., etc. They usually have relatives in the opposite side of the border, in the Turkish border area. However, it's really very hard to help them because there is still some danger, and the border crossing is quite problematic. Although there are some safe havens in the border crossing, which some uncontrolled crossings can be made, only limited amount of food and basic needs can be carried to the other side.
And Can, just before I let you go, the people who you speak to in this part of Syria, do they want to leave the country? Would they prefer to be in Turkey?
As I told you, many people have already preferred to move to Turkey. Here, most of the people staying in this village are fighters. For FSA, Free Syrian Army. Turkey is now expecting another migrant group huge migrant group. If the fighting in this area escalates, there are nearly 100,000 migrants, Syrian migrants, and yesterday we were in another place. It was another border crossing. It was Öncüpınar crossing, and there was a huge camp there, and we have seen lots of Syrians fleeing their countries. Some people just own food, some people, if they have, with their cars. So there's a lot of, so the flow of people going on.
Jan, we really do appreciate the time that you've given us today on World Have Your Say. Thank you very much for joining us live. That's Can Artuna from Turkish television's NTV.
Thank you.
He is reporting from inside of Syria using 3G cards. Thank you very much indeed to him for his help in understanding what's happening inside of Syria. Now let's bring in three other guests to introduce you to. Cihan Kenar is a Turkish journalist who's live in Istanbul. We're also joined by Çiğil Kasipoglu from the BBC's Turkish service and by Ender Korkmaz, who's a PR manager for an NGO in Istanbul. All three of you, you're very welcome. Ender, let me start with you. Your government says it doesn't want war. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, my government doesn't want war, and I think they have voted this permission to take an invitation on Syria is just encouraging the pressure on Syria regime not dare to hit Turkish people again.
But when you see your own countrymen and women being killed by Syrian weapons, don't you think that a military response may be necessary?
You know, there are rules on military engagements, and Turkish armed forces have barraged an artillery fire against the artillery shell that fall into Akcakale, and that was enough for us.
Ender, thank you very much indeed for joining us live from Istanbul. We appreciate it. Çiğil, let's bring you in because I know that BBC Turkish has been receiving thousands of messages. The Turkish parliament has authorized military action inside Syria if necessary. Do your users online want that to happen?
Well, overwhelming the majority not, because the messages that we are receiving are mostly against the war. One of them, Abbas Kılıç, sent us a message through Facebook saying it is too early for Turkey to consider going to war. This is because any war that Turkey enters will be a world war. So they are mainly pointing out the geostrategic position of Turkey, and then the neighbors would be also involved into a possible war, and that would cause a huge, large world war. That's what they think mainly.
And Cihan, you're joining us live from Istanbul. Your government started off trying to be the broker with Syria. It negotiated some reforms that Bashar al-Assad was supposed to implement. That didn't happen. Are you disappointed that your country has had to resort to firing rockets into Syria?
Of course. I mean, the best solution for the Syrian issue would be a diplomatic solution. However, I think the Assad regime is responsible for halting any kind of this diplomatic solution on the Syrian issue, because we're talking about a regime which is convinced to kill its citizens in a very, very brutal way. So unfortunately, the conflict in Syria has turned into a civil war. However, I don't think Turkey is willing to engage in any kind of large-scale military operation against Syria. So I don't think war is on the agenda of Turkey, and the recent incidents do not indicate that Turkey wants to launch a war against Syria. However, the best solution right now is to accelerate the overthrowing of the regime. I mean, Turkey and other international actors should step in and support the opposition more to hasten this process.
Let me read you a message, Cihan, that Samson has posted on facebook.com/World Have Your Say. Let's put it up on the screen. He says it's a moral duty for Turkey to invade Syria with allies from the free world. Dictators who murder their own people must be removed by military action. I wonder if you felt that Turkey had the support of countries like Russia, that may be unlikely, countries like Russia and America, would you then support military action?
I believe the best solution to the crisis will be a well-planned international intervention. I am against Turkey's involvement in this crisis, and I am against this issue turning into a war between Syria and Turkey. The best option is an international, well-planned military intervention. However, as you said, major actors are not willing to engage in such an endeavor. So we have the other option right now on the table, which is arming the opposition more. Because if we believe that Assad regime is not legitimate anymore, then we should do as people who believe in a democratic Syria, in a Syria which is emancipated from this dictatorship, we should support the opposition more.
Jiren, thank you very much. Ender, you're also in Istanbul. Do you want to respond? Doesn't sound like Ender can hear me. Maybe his Skype connection is frozen. In the meantime, I know that some of you have got in touch from Saudi Arabia, Nepal, Germany, Nigeria, Spain and Tanzania. Remember, if you don't want to call us directly, if you message us your number or your Skype ID, the World Have Your Say team will do their very best to get back to you. Well, we'll say thanks to Ender in Istanbul because we haven't made that connection work, but we appreciate him coming on. Let's bring in Farouk Teague, who is a reporter with Euronote News based in France. He's live with us from Paris. And if any of you have been watching a film called 24 Hours in Aleppo, well, this is the man behind it. Farouk, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we're doing two things on World Have Your Say today. We're discussing how Turkey might respond to the weapons that have been sent into its country by Syria, but we're also trying to get a handle on the day-to-day life of Syrians who remain in their country. Tell us what you saw in Aleppo.
Well, the situation in Aleppo is very, very complicated, and the last day we've been there, especially the two last days, it was particularly dangerous because we couldn't move very carefully inside the city. We had to wait sometimes that the bombings, the shellings could stop, and it took hours, for example, to join one of our contact inside the city. And despite that, we feel that the population still living in the country and decided not to leave to Turkey border, for example, they just don't care about what's happening around them. It's like a kind of resignation of the population. Even children that we met are not really scared about what's happening around them, and shellings are going on and on. So for me, like I told before, I think this situation went to hell.
Well, Farouk, we appreciate you coming on. I tweeted just before I came into the studio a link to your film, 24 Hours in Aleppo, so if people want to see that, they can go to @BBC Ros Atkins. After we've taken a short break, we're going to be bringing in the BBC's Lise Doucette to share some of her experiences inside Syria recently. But let's just pause for a couple of moments. Hi, this is Ros Atkins. Welcome back to World Have Your Say. We're talking about Turkey and Syria in a great deal of detail. If you are Turkish or Syrian and would like to take part, all of the contact details will appear on the screen as the programme goes along. Live from Paris is Farouk Teague. He is a reporter with Euronews, based in France, but recently back from Aleppo. We're also joined by Janan Musa, a Lebanese reporter for Arabic Alan TV. She is based in Dubai. And our third guest for the moment is the BBC's chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who some of you may have seen presenting Impact just a little while ago here on the BBC. And all three of you, we're very interested to hear your experiences, what you saw of the impact this conflict is having on day-to-day life. Perhaps, Lise, you could share with us a little of what you saw in Damascus.
It was quite extraordinary to be back in Damascus. I've been visiting it every 6 months since the uprising began about 18 months ago. And now, as you can see from the images, we're seeing there the black smoke billowing across the Damascus skyline. We have never seen that before. Certainly the residents of Damascus never believed that the war would reach right into the heart of their city. We were there for more than a week, and not a day went by without the sound of government shelling on neighbourhoods, and not just on the southern outskirts, which have tended to be the most rebellious. You can hear explosions and shelling night and day in Damascus now. But I have to say, in contrast, we went to Latakia, which is the ancestral home of the Assads, a political stronghold. And there, in parts of Latakia, certainly Latakia city, life goes on as normal. People were on the beach and jet skis, people were there holidaying, people were there admittedly seeking refuge from Damascus and from Aleppo. But talking to students there, talking to residents, the war hasn't really touched the heart of Latakia yet. So this is very much underlining how Syria is very, very much a divided country, but everybody is acutely aware of the war that's striking their country, a moment of greatest crisis.
And Lise, as you're talking, we're seeing some of the pictures which you and your colleagues filmed while you were there. Before then, we saw some recent pictures in today from Homs, where some activists are claiming the bombardments taking place are heavier than they have been for weeks. Janan, perhaps we could bring you in at this stage. Tell us what part of Syria you visited and what you saw.
Managed to get into Aleppo city. Aleppo city is extremely scary. Actually, I could see people walking through the rubble, carrying bags, with their belongings, whatever they could take, either on their shoulders or on their head, or just dragging things, trying to get out of that city. It was heartbreaking. I was allowed to sleep in one of the apartments of the families who actually left the city and became refugees. It was heartbreaking to see their pictures, family pictures still hanging on the wall. You could see how much in a hurry they had. They had to leave. Their clothes were still everywhere. The food was still in the cupboard. And then on that same night, I got to experience and to understand why they had to leave in such a hurry, because the intense shelling, extreme intense shelling with planes that started. And then at one point, I was just laying under the bed with my flak jacket. And then I ran into a lower apartment with my face just like hiding on the floor of the kitchen, just praying that the bomb doesn't hit us. And that is the reality today in Aleppo. During the day, when there's like a little bit of a break where you could actually go out and see a little bit of the city, you manage to see the few residents who actually stayed there, like either lining up in tents in front of bakeries, trying to get bread or whatever they could get to sustain their families. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Farouk.
Hello? Well, to continue with what she's saying, people that we met inside the city, some of them even asked for NATO to bomb their country, because they just say, well, if Bashar al-Assad regime is all the time bombing us, we prefer that NATO make this, and maybe there's going to be a solution. So people are kind of becoming crazy about this conflict, and it's very, very worrying.
Farouk, you're in Paris, Janan is in Dubai, Lise is here in London, Stefan is in Salt Lake City, and he's got a question for the three of you, which he's posted on Facebook. How is the reliability of basic services such as power and water compared to how it used to be? Well, perhaps Lise, you could answer that one first.
I think it very much depends where you are in Syria, but even in Damascus now, there are electricity cuts all through the day, and those would be the people who would have the most reliable electricity. We've heard from Janan and Farouk what happened when they were in Aleppo. They've used words like hell and frightening. We've heard of how the water supply was deliberately cut off in Aleppo, cut off to the residents there. In Latakia, along the coast, all is well, electricity, water supplies, everything is very reliable. But we're hearing today about the heavy, heavy bombardment in Homs. I was in Homs in May, and there is another place where, again, the basic services are very, very much unreliable because the city is being torn apart.
And Farouk, what about Aleppo in terms of power and water? Farouk?
Can I go on that?
Well, of course you can. Yeah, Janan, go ahead.
Okay, I mean, yeah, the electricity cuts are like all day long, and it's now becoming increasingly worrying because, winter season is coming, and, a lot of people find themselves without electricity, without actually gas, and they cannot heat during the winter, And I just want to point to one thing, like we keep on speaking about Aleppo because Aleppo city, is getting all the attention because a a lot of journalists are able to get there. But there are like hundreds of other Aleppos which we do not hear about on regular basis. For example, I was in a little town called Jarjanaz, and this town is 40 kilometers from Hama city. Hama, we all know, at the beginning of the revolution, we saw massive protests there against Bashar al-Assad, but with time he was able to quell the revolution there. Now it's totally under regime control. So that area, in Jarjanaz specifically, it was the scenario was similar to what is happening to Aleppo city, but of course fewer and fewer people can reach that because you have to pass a highway, the Damascus-Aleppo highway, on which the regime forces are still taking. So that is extremely dangerous. There was shelling and the intense bombing, and the moment we were able to get out of the shelter, you could just see smoke everywhere. You could see people injured, like tens of people injured, just hurrying to private clinics because they are scared to go to public hospitals in fear of getting hit. So just the point that I wanted to make is that there are a lot of the little Aleppos everywhere, but you know, we obviously cannot hear the full story always.
And Lise, can I ask you one question? You've been into areas where most people support the government and areas where most people support the rebels. Just by looking at it before you'd even talked about politics, could you tell which side people were on just by the services which are available to them?
No, I think this is a country which is very much engulfed by war, whether you're, of course, the areas which are now controlled by the rebels come under heavy bombardment. There's no comparison with the kind of firepower that's at the disposal of the government when the rebels have far fewer explosives and weapons in their armory. But everyone is affected by them. We shouldn't forget, too, that there are so many displaced people across the country who are living in schools, living in tents, living in homes, and this also puts pressure on the services as well. But obviously places in Damascus, places in Latakia where we were able to visit, those areas are better served. They're areas which are heavily protected by government forces and where the government is very keen that it keeps holding on to them.
Let me tell you that people have got in touch from Guinea, Kenya, Greece, Cameroon, Oman, Ethiopia, Turkey and Algeria. We certainly do appreciate all three of you being on World Have Your Say. Let me pull up one more point for you from Harry, posting on Facebook. He doesn't say where he is, but goes on to write, what are people still doing in Aleppo? Is it even habitable? Well, perhaps Farouk in Paris, you could answer that one.
Well, I don't think it's still habitable, but I think probably 2 million of the people living there are still there and put themselves and put their lives in danger. But think this is going to change except if there is a diplomatic or a solution. So people, for example, we talked to a few people and all of them said that they do not spend the night inside their apartments but in the corridor, one behind the other, so they could be like quickly responding to a fear of bombings and go out and get out from the building. So yeah, there are still people living in Aleppo, and because they think it's important to stay in their house in case this conflict goes to an end.
Well, Farouk and Janan, I think you can stay for a few more minutes, and we appreciate you coming on. Lise, I know that you need to get going in a little while, but I'm hoping you can stay for a bit longer too. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Let me introduce you to the three guests who are going to begin this half an hour on BBC World News. Diana Darks, an author and an Arab world specialist. She's live from central London. We still have Çil Kesipoglu from the BBC's Turkish service, also in central London, and Jiran Kenar, a Turkish journalist, joining us from Istanbul. And if you're thinking, where's Lise Doucet gone, she'll be back in a couple of minutes' time. So if you've got questions for Lise, facebook.com/World Have Your Say is the best place to go. Diane, perhaps we could start with you. You spent some time in London. You also have a home in Damascus. I wonder what your reflections are on how Turkey should respond to such a difficult week.
Well, I've been visiting the region since the mid-70s, so I remember it how it used to be, and I have to say that I think the really crushing thing is the destruction of the social fabric that used to exist there, that everybody coexisted perfectly happily, but now the social fabric is falling to pieces, and I think this is in fact a deliberate policy by Bashar al-Assad. I mean, for example, I've been reliably told by many Syrian sources that prisoners, I mean non-political prisoners, have been let out deliberately from all over Syria in order to create chaos and lawlessness. And so where you have, it's not just a straightforward case of the regime versus the Free Syrian Army rebels. You've got an awful lot of lawless elements creeping in there that nobody can control, and this is where you get these incredibly grey areas of war, you know, where I mean, when the regime announced, for instance, that it had to investigate this the shelling across the border, you know, it's impossible to say who actually might have been responsible. There are so many lawless elements at the moment now in Syria that it's almost impossible to control.
Well, Diana, we appreciate you coming on World Have Your Say. Stay with us. And Philip from Saudi Arabia's emailed to say invading Syria will show the rest of the Sunni Muslim world that Turkey is ready to become the policeman of the region. I guess it's more a question of whether Turks want their country to play that role. Royken in Nairobi on Facebook says Turkey should go beyond their border and try and create a safe buffer zone for Syrian refugees. Well, that is an idea which has been suggested several times over the last few months. We'll certainly discuss that in a minute. Let's also pull up Colbert from Cameroon, who's posted on Facebook, war with Syria will only increase violence in the region, so they have got to think about it again. Well, I'm Chill from BBC Turkish. I wonder if you could reflect on this idea of Turkey as a regional policeman. Do you think it's a role Turkey wants?
Well, it was a role Turkey wanted a couple of years ago when Turkey's zero problem with neighbors policy has been launched by Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu. And within this policy, Syria and Turkey has lifted visa restrictions, signed free trade agreements. And like a couple of years ago, again, Turkish President Abdullah Gül has visited Damascus. So all those were signs of friendships. But recently, I mean, we know that after the uprising and that the conflict has been more tense, that the free trade agreement has also been suspended. Plus, Turkey has also been a facilitator between Israel and Syria for the Golan Heights issue. But apparently, after four rounds, these talks have been suspended. So Turkey seems like slowly losing its mediator and facilitator position in the region.
Jiran?
Well, it is true. I agree with Chil in the sense that Turkey used to emphasize the concept of soft power before. But we also have to see, I think, the settings in the region, the structure of the region is changing. I mean, Syria is a neighboring country of Turkey, and the conflict in Syria is actually kind of a domestic issue for Turkey because it very much affects Turkey's security in the region as well. So Turkey had to be involved in this conflict. Turkey cannot stay away from what is going on in Syria. However, of course, we can discuss the level of engagement and the content of engagement. How should Turkey be involved in this crisis is, I think, a legitimate question that should be discussed in Turkey. And we can also point out that Turkish public opinion is very much divided on the Syrian issue. And we can say that actually many Turks are not happy to see Turkey getting involved in this crisis. And even voters for AKP, the ruling party, are not backing government's policy on Syria. So in a way, there are two elements that hinders or limits the Turkish government's involvement in Syria. The first one is an international hindrance. Turkey feels itself alone in this crisis. Turkey feels that its allies are not supportive enough. And the second one is this domestic dimension. Turkish public opinion is not willing to see Turkey getting too much involved in this crisis, let alone they would be happy Turkey launching a full-scale military operation and unilateral military operation against Syria.
Jill, I can see you responding there as Jiran was talking.
Because I'm not quite sure if this would be done, what is needed to be done. This would mean that the failure of foreign policy if we consumed all the means to to solve a conflict in a peaceful way, then the next solution would be only to launch a war, and this would also sign maybe a bit of a failure here.
Jill, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Diana and Chinan too. Turet's just called us up from Istanbul. Turet, thanks for tuning to the BBC and for getting in touch. What's your point?
Yeah, hi, Turet from Istanbul. Like most of the Turkish people, I think that we are so much involved in this Syria thing. We have our own issues, like we have PKK terrorists in Turkey. And, you know, after we involve in this Syria thing, we have more soldiers keep dying and dying. So we should only retaliate what Syria does, but we shouldn't go further. Like, we should get out of there. Like, we shouldn't go to any war with them because it's their fight. It's not ours. But I don't know why our government is so much interested there. But like as you see on TV, almost everyone is against that.
Turet, thank you very much indeed for calling us from Istanbul. Edward in Germany says no one's got the right to tell the Syrian government to quit. Let's remain objective. And Murad, who is Turkish but living in California, has just called up to tell us Turkey should not be involved in any war unilaterally. NATO and the UN should give backing to any military action. Well, we're going to keep on talking about this and return to Lise Doucet and others to talk about the day-to-day impact of the Syrian conflict on the people who are living there in just a couple of minutes' time. The warning from the UN is that the situation in Syria may pose a threat to regional security, and if it's regional concerns the UN is focusing on, it's certainly of global concern, judging by the number of people getting in touch with us. We've just had calls from Afghanistan, Belgium, Hungary, Trinidad, Sweden and Somalia. Thank you very much for all of your comments. If you want to join in online, we're on the hashtag WHYS or at facebook.com/World Have Your Say. And we've been talking all the way through about the attitudes of people in Turkey towards the idea of military intervention. Well, one Transatlantic Trends 2012 survey found that 57% of Turkish people thought that Turkey should stay completely out of Syria. And it's interesting looking at a Pew Global Attitudes project as well. Turks believe that Assad should step down in far fewer numbers than people in Jordan and Egypt. So that's just a little bit of context. Lots of you, as I was mentioning, have been calling us and messaging us. Let's bring in Nuala from the World Have Your Say team to hear some more of what you've been saying. Hi, Nuala.
Hi, Roz. Well, you mentioned a few countries there. Let me add Saudi Arabia, Nigeria and the state of California in the United States. And let's listen to a couple of the calls that have been coming in. So Andrew in Saudi Arabia says, I was surprised that the world's powers have not made more of an effort to try and get a UN resolution. That still hasn't come through. Murad in California is echoing what Andrew's saying. He's a Turkish American living in California for 30 years. Turkey should not be involved in the war unilaterally. NATO should be involved, so should the UN. A lot of people are going to die and it will end up like Iraq if not, he thinks. And ACOM in Nigeria. For Turkey to invade Syria on behalf of the United States, not for their own sake, is morally wrong. It should be handled diplomatically. So ACOM thinking that really this isn't Turkey's decision, that they're doing it at the behest of the United States.
Nuala, thanks very much. You're going to be on BBC World Service Radio with World Have Your Say in just over an hour's time. I was seeing on Facebook we're going to be looking at that ruling in a high court in London about the three Kenyans seeking to sue the British government. A lot of a division of opinion there. Some people think it's way too late to sue. It was 1952 when the torture happened. So we're going to have a lively debate on that. There's hundreds of comments already on the BBC News website. We're also going to take a look at the Jordan protests. Did they materialise in the way that the Muslim Brotherhood wanted them to? All right, Nuala, thank you very much indeed. And you can listen to Nuala on World Have Your Say at bbcworldservice.com. I wonder if I could bring you in, Diana Dark, an author, Middle East expert, someone who calls Damascus home as well. Lots of people mentioning the UN on our Facebook page. Do you think that the Syrian conflict has highlighted that the veto in the Security Council really does undermine the UN's ability to respond to situations like this?
I'm afraid it does, and it does highlight that everybody is sadly looking out for their own interests, and Syria has been left alone. I mean, there's definitely a sense amongst all the Syrians that I speak to that that Syria has been abandoned, and that it's well, that the great powers sort of almost want it to be done on the cheap, you know, that if Syria can destroy itself from within and eventually make some, you know, it's impossible actually to see how Bashar al-Assad is going to leave. So he will never leave voluntarily. So the rebels know that this is a fight to the death, and whilst everybody just stands and looks on, there is nothing to look forward to but more and more war. And it's worth saying that already the figures are higher than anything that Iraq ever produced. I mean, 3,000 in July 2006 was the highest that Iraq ever reached, whereas it was 5,000 in August alone in Syria.
And Diana, as you're talking, we're seeing pictures of anti-war protests in Istanbul yesterday. Interesting the things that you're saying. I heard an interview with Kofi Annan on BBC Radio earlier in which he said if Assad were to go, this may be the beginning of the conflict rather than the end. Let's bring in a couple of the guests we've already spoken to. We can bring back in Farouk in Paris and also Lise Doucette here in London. And before I speak to them, here's a message from Jama in South Africa is posted on Facebook. Why is the Turkish government fueling the Syrian civil war by arming the insurgents instead of talking to Assad directly? Well, Lise, I know we invited you to talk about day-to-day life, but you're well informed on this issue too. Many people suspect the Turks of helping the rebels. How established is the link?
Well, what I've been told when I'm inside Syria is that there is all kinds of support that's reaching the rebels, including guns. And they said often it's done through third parties. So sometimes even the rebel groups, and of course there are many, many different rebel formations now across the country, sometimes organized city to city and neighborhood to neighborhood. They get the weapons and they're not quite sure where they are coming from. Turkey is widely regarded as being the transit location. There have been quite reliable reports that Gulf states like Qatar and Saudi Arabia are arming the rebels. Even if it's not true, I have to say, no matter where I travel in areas that are under government control, the allegation is made by people from all walks of life who still support President Assad that it is Qatar and Saudi Arabia who are basically fueling this conflict, turning it into a proxy war. But of course, on the other side, the rebels say we're not getting enough support. Look at the kind of a ragtag armory that we've been able to put together. We're basically putting together whatever we can find because we're not getting enough military support. So different perceptions, but certainly a war that is getting worse by the day.
Lise, thank you very much indeed. Farouk still with us in Paris. We're also bringing back in Janan, who is a reporter with Al-An TV and based in Dubai. I've got to ask all three of you about the children who you've met. Lise, I remember you reporting from a refugee camp in Jordan in the last few weeks. Farouk, your film from Aleppo features some children being treated by doctors. And Janan, I know you've reflected on this too. When you met children, when you met their parents, did you have any hope that some provision was being provided to separate them from this conflict? Farouk?
Well, I don't really know. I can assure you that there is a real problem with the parents considering the lack of milk, for example, which is something normal. But in this city, there is a huge lack of milk, and in this hospital, only 30 beds are booked for pupils and children suffering from problem hydration. So there is a black market even for milk and of course for gas, but even for milk. So situation is very complicated. I hadn't heard of that before. Lise, what about you?
Well, it's absolutely heartbreaking. War is tragic for adults, but it tears your heart apart when you see the children. Children are seeing and hearing and living through things that they should never have to in their childhood. I've just come back from Latakia to a sports stadium, which is now housing some 500 families from Aleppo. And I spoke to one family, still traumatized, who said we had to take our children away. They described Aleppo as a disaster area, that bodies were lying in the streets. They said our children should not see this. And yet in a refugee camp in Lebanon, I met a girl who'd seen her best childhood friend die before our eyes. And I think what's remarkable is how much strength these children find, but they will live with horrible memories for all of their lives.
Lise, thank you very much indeed. Janan, I wanted to ask you as well, but I'm afraid we're out of time, and this isn't a subject which we should try and rush through in 10 or 20 seconds. So I'll say thank you to you and certainly promise that we'll have you back on World Have Your Say very soon indeed. Janan Musa was live with us from Dubai. The BBC's Lise Doucette is here in London. Thanks also to Farouk, who joined us live, Farouk Atig from Euronews, who joined us live from Paris. You can carry on the discussion as ever on World Have Your Say, facebook.com/World Have Your Say, and you can also stream our radio edition in 1 hour's time. I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.
Наша